In summer 2019, I had the opportunity to visit almost 20 different theme parks in Japan. This was a really cool opportunity for me as I've been to plenty of parks around America and Europe. And what I like is that Japan brings a completely different atmosphere versus parks in other parts of the world. And one of the things that stood out to me is that many of the parks feel outdated or as if they haven't been renovated in many years. Many of them lack new attractions or just felt like they needed some TLC. I found this interesting because we saw this pattern with many parks in the country. It wasn't just one or two. And so it got me thinking, why do so many parks in Japan feel outdated? To help me discuss this point, I've brought in Sean Flaherty, a member of our group who had the fortunate opportunity to visit Japan in 2005, which allowed him to see the contrast of how many of these parks have changed over the years.
The parks in Japan have a very, very similar feel, even though they are completely different at the same time. A lot of the parks we went to on the 2019 trip I had visited before, and quite honestly, I was very surprised at how similar they were from my 2005 trip.
Hakuge and Panic Coaster Backdan were the only new for 2019 coasters that debuted at parks we visited.
On this 2019 trip, I only rode, personally, maybe 16 new coasters because I had already visited those parks. Some of the coasters I rode back in 2005 are no longer at these parks, and these parks very rarely put in a replacement coaster. Tobu Zoo, for instance, had a Togo Looping Mouse, and they had a drop tower that was fantastic, and both of those rides are gone. And Regina is now officially closed and going to be removed from the park.
The only logical answer that I can draw is that they aren't bringing in a new replacement because the demand isn't there, or they financially cannot afford it.
One thing that was very common on our trip was the lack of attendance. At most of these parks, we were virtually the only people riding the coasters and other rides throughout the park.
Some people will point out that we did visit during July, which one is their rainy season, so hence why a lot of people might not be out at the parks, but also a lot of Japanese schools were in session, so maybe some of the families and the kids weren't out at the parks on the weekdays. But I don't think that is the entire reason why the parks are empty. There's still plenty of people in the country. Over 126 million people live in Japan. How is it that we could be walking along the streets and there's tons of people out and about, then the second you step foot in a theme park, no one is there? We, of course, did see lots of crowds at the popular parks, such as Tokyo Disney Resort, Universal Studios Japan, Fuji-Q, and Nagashima.
When I did my trip in 2005, the parks were completely dead as well. And the weather was very, very similar, but we were just astounded at how many parks had virtually no lines at all. So when we planned this trip in 2019 and the rest of the guys suggested we try it in July, my first reaction was, oh, you guys, we may see some lines there. And we really didn't, other than the popular parks, as Taylor has noted. And that is one of the things that baffles me. You know, many questions come to mind, such as, why are these parks open when there's no one there? Only the owners can give us that answer, which brings up another question. Why is this something we're seeing all over Japan? Apparently, from what I was told during my 2005 trip, the parks used to be open in the winter, then they closed, then all the locals kind of complained about that and reopened those parks in the winter. And I have no idea if those parks are busy in the winter or not. It would be something to check out for sure.
It seems we're always hearing about one of the parks in Japan that is closing a new attraction or the park entirely. It wasn't too long ago where we heard Sea Paradise would be closing their very famous Intamin drop tower, Blue Fall. And yes, even this year, we're seeing yet another Japan theme park close. This one, Misaki Park in Osaka. This was a small family-owned park that closed March 31st. What happened around then? The pandemic hit. Obviously, everyone's hurting because of that, but that tells you that that park was not in a financially stable situation before the pandemic, and as soon as it hit, they knew they didn't stand a chance.
Parks like Sendai Highland closed because of the nuclear disaster and never even tried to reopen. When I visited Space World in 2005, the park seemed run down, but it had its fans. It was in a very popular area of the country. And then when you look at a ride like Titan that clearly needed some maintenance, it clearly needed a paint job, and then a couple years after I was in Japan for the first time, they built a Intamin hydraulic launch coaster, a clone of Stealth, actually. But that wasn't enough to save Space World, unfortunately, and a very, very unique park, once again, closed for good.
When we visited Japan in 2019, unfortunately, one of the common discussions that we had after visiting a park is, the next time we're in Japan, whether that be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how many of those parks will be gone? You want my guess? As sad as it is to say, I would not be surprised if a few of them don't have much longer left. A couple that come to mind: Tobu Zoo, Nasu Highland, Brazilian Park Washuzan Highland, Himeji Central Park, and even Greenland. All of these, in what you would think, are very good locations. Which leads me to suspect that location is not the reason. Ed Hart was once quoted saying, "If you build it, they will come." So why aren't the Japanese people coming? Enter Expoland 2007. Fujin Rajan 2 was a Togo stand-up coaster that ultimately led to the downfall of Expoland, as well as a lot of the Japanese trust in theme parks. On May 5th, 2007, the ride derailed due to a broken axle that had not been replaced in 15 years. And the accident was fatal. It'll go down as one of the worst accidents in amusement history, as it killed someone and injured 18 others. The park tried to operate for a few months after, but ultimately closed at the end of the year. Why did Expoland close? No one was showing up. Since Expoland's closure, 13 other amusement parks in Japan have closed. One of the biggest things I was impressed with in the 3 weeks I spent in Japan was the entire culture built around the people. A major aspect of that is trust. For example, Shinkansen bullet trains are used all across the country and have never killed a single person. And they're extremely popular. The people have their standards set extremely high, so when an accident happens, they lose their trust not in just the one park, but all of them. What happens now that no one's showing up? For one, the Japanese government has more rules and regulations concerning safety, and with no one showing up, a lot of these parks don't have the money to adapt to those new changes. I wouldn't be surprised if many of them are still struggling to stay afloat to this day.
A lot of these parks, for them, in a way, a new attraction can be just as easy as just painting the coaster.
With Washuzan Highland, they repainted their Togo stand-up coaster, as well as their Togo Ultra Twister. A park like Greenland looked like they hadn't given any of their rides a paint job in years. And with something so simple as making the rides look good, making the park look good, when was the last time things were repaved? Have the buildings been updated? When we were at Nasu Highland, the place looked like it had been stuck in the 90s. Multiple attractions were closed, and we were told some might not ever reopen. One particular ride, a corkscrew, was covered in rust.
Despite the dilapidated nature visually, the employees at these parks were top-notch, always with a smile, always willing to give us as many rides as we'd like.
And the same goes for the guests. They seemed very happy to be there, which if that's the case, why are more not showing up? The accident happened over 10 years ago. How long is it going to take for things to bounce back? Unfortunately, it might not ever happen, especially when you have big boy competitors like Universal and Disney. And they have something going for them that these parks don't: IPs. Why would you travel several hours out of your way to go to some random theme park when you could pay a little bit more and get a much nicer experience featuring characters that you love?
So a lot of these parks do not have IPs, and they have their own characters as mascots. They often have characters that are very cute, that the Japanese love, but it's not enough to bring massive crowds to the parks. From talking to several other folks that went to Japan during various times in the year, they all experienced the same outcome.
It's one of the reasons where we're always encouraging people to go support their local parks. Look at Indiana Beach. That was a place that we thought was fine, and in the end, it did get saved, but there was a time where we thought another family-owned park bites the dust. In Japan, there might not be anyone to go on and quote-unquote save Indiana Beach. While on the trip, we briefly stopped by Toshiman, but ended up not visiting. We might regret that decision because a couple months ago, we heard that the park might be completely transformed into some sort of Harry Potter attraction. So here is yet another prime example of a family-owned park that probably wasn't getting the attendance they wanted. And look what's happening. It's being replaced by an IP.
It is very, very important to visit any small park, but I think it's even more important to visit some of these smaller Japanese parks. If Japan is in your schedule for anything business, just a normal vacation, please go out of your way if you have to visit these small parks, because they are gems and they really deserve more attention than what they're getting.
I'd like to thank Sean for being a part of this video, and if you have any insight upon some of the questions that we asked, or any thoughts that you'd like to share, I encourage you to post them down in the comments below. And if you're interested, be sure to go check out Sean's channel. I'll post a link down in the description below. Hopefully you'll subscribe, and if you haven't already, go check out some of his Japan videos, especially some of his old footage from 2005. It will shock you how some of it looks the exact same that it does today. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you next time.